Welcome to this webinar on shaping change, and where we want to present you how learning can actually help employees to shape change instead of being driven by it. If we look at the current developments, then we see in all the different sectors fundamental transformations of the world of work, demographic change, new leadership approaches, and especially digitization, which hits more and more sectors. In this case, we need to look more closely on how employees can actually manage that change. Are they driven by it, or are they capable of shaping that change? And if we see the role of learning in that process, it's that learning actually needs to empower employees to do that shaping of change. But what does it take actually to be capable of shaping change? It's just not about new skills like using IT technology. It's also not just about acquiring new methods of doing things, new processes. It's also about dealing with conflicting demands that arise from different stakeholders, that arise also from different timelines, and also how work is actually being conducted needs to be completely redesigned, and the understanding of what is good work needs to be redeveloped in that process. And that is not only then about simple changes, that reaches deeper and affects the identity of the individuals. And identity means it's about who we are and who we want to be. So it's not just about work, it's part of us that actually is affected, and therefore this topic of shaping change can also not just be reached by traditional approaches that scratch at the surface. If we look more closely, what happens actually when our identity development doesn't have the same pace as the development and change in our work environment? We often then experience stressful job experiences, and we see also the increasing number of complaints about that. It usually expresses itself also in resistance to change. You want to stick to the old way. And also other phenomena where unhappiness and also bad quality of work outcomes can be observed, which are not based on lack of skills, but which root deeper. How can now identities and our understanding of who we are and what we want to be in the context of our work, how can that be developed over time? First of all, we need to realize that it's a complex process. And it's a complex process because there are a lot of dependencies. We influence others, we influence our colleagues and other members of our profession, but also the others influence us. So it's not just about a single individual to change, it's about a whole professional group to go on a transformation journey. And it influences also our work. When we change our understanding of who we are and who we want to be, it has an influence on how we actually carry out our work. And in the other way around, if we have changed working conditions, that also affects how we perceive ourselves and our identity. And not to forget about the affective dimension of that whole process. So it's about emotions. It's not just about rational decisions. It's about coping with emotions. It's about our motivation to work. And it's about also attitudes that need to change. And as we know in other places, these are slow to change and also not directly to be influenced. One key thing to realize is if there is so much dependency on the social context where we carry out our work, we cannot continue with a model that's asymmetric, whether you have an instructor and a learner. It's rather that we support each other in our learning process, and we need to put much more focus into the role of how to support others' learning, each of us and each of our colleagues. And that means traditional forms of learning are not the only thing that can help us here. Clearly not. We especially need to put much more focus to informal forms of learning, because only those forms of learning that are deeply embedded into work practices, that are based on peer support, and that are not focused so much on an instructor who knows more than everyone else, only those can then create an environment in which we have identity also transform. And this involves then rethinking our relationships with other professions and other colleagues. This requires also cognitive skills, new cognitive skills. It requires that we transform our practices. And finally also it requires us to deal with our emotions, to cope also with emotional stress, to develop new coping strategies, and to incorporate those emotions into our work and into our identity. One way of doing that, and one method that's particularly suited for that, is storytelling. So we are all used to tell stories. We are telling them many times during the day also. And stories are a quite natural way of expressing our emotions and also our identity. So we're telling stories about what was good, what we were proud of. We're telling stories about things that we were afraid of, that things that we consider bad. And therefore storytelling as a structured approach actually looks more closely at those storytelling approaches that extract stories from the actual workplace and help then to make sense together about what's going on inside an organization or inside also a professional group. And it triggers then usually not just individual learning processes, but it also triggers organizational learning processes through its medium, the story, which is much more suited also for having conversations than just facts would actually be.